Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Joining me now, Michelle Eisen. She is an organizing member of Starbucks Workers United from Buffalo. Michelle, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So you were one of the original organizers of, and you guys up in Buffalo started, I think, largely started this sort of wave across the country of Starbucks organizing. We spoke to Jazz Bresack, I can't remember, some time ago. And got a sense, I think, as this was sort of like building across the country. Let's start just with Buffalo and talk about how the organizing started there and then where it went from there.
Sure. I think it's easier if I give you a little background of myself with the company, if that's okay, and what brought me to this point. Yes, please.
I understand you were working there for 12 years.
Yes. So I started back in 2010. I'm a production stage manager by trade, which is awesome, but it's a job in the arts in this country of ours, and it doesn't come with benefits most of the time. And often you do have to find something to supplement your income. And so that's what brought me to the company. I was looking for something I could work part-time that was flexible, that would allow me to have health benefits, which is, that's what the company touted. That was its claim to fame, right? Part-time workers were able to be benefits eligible. And it was also a company that had a reputation for being better, for treating their workers better, for caring about the environment, for caring about the community. And so I applied and I was hired. And for the first few years I was with the company, that was true for the most part. Their mission and values, they lived up to that. I felt valued. I had a flexible schedule. There were different kinds of benefits, other kinds of benefits besides health benefits that they gave to their workers that made you feel like you counted, like you mattered, like your work was important. And then probably 5 or 6 years ago, this is pre-pandemic, I want to be very clear about that, there was a very significant shift in how the workers were treated, how the company was viewing its, hourly workforce. And you didn't really notice if you weren't really paying attention. And if you didn't have, the history with the company to know what it was even, a few years before. But things started changing. I started seeing the benefits packages started rising in cost and the coverage started going down. For me, the kicker was in 2018, I broke my ankle. And I'd been working for the company for 8 years at this point, and I'd been paying into benefits the entire time. And the benefits packages had been gutted to such a degree that I ended up paying for the entire medical cost of this ankle break out of my pocket while I had health insurance with this company. And that's where I started kind of questioning what was happening and what I was still doing there, really. That's the only reason I'd come there to begin with. And then, of course, not long after that incident, the pandemic hit. And even if I had started to think about what life would be like without Starbucks and what I would do, at that point, there were no choices because my other industry shut down completely. Right. And so now I found myself, in this job that I had originally planned to do 20 hours a week, being there 40 hours a week. And all of the little things that had been bothersome or had been issues that I could kind of forget about when I walked out of that cafe every day, they became much more apparent because I was spending a lot more time in them. And now we were put in a situation where our health and safety was actually at risk every single day going to work in this pandemic. Starbucks stayed open the entire time. We were one of the few companies that, really didn't close long before a vaccine was on the horizon. And I'm finding myself there and I'm putting myself at risk every day. I'm putting my family at risk every day to serve our community. And we're being called by the company and told you're essential to the world right now. What service you're providing is essential to your communities. And we're really thankful that you're here and your safety is of the utmost importance. But that's not what I was seeing. We were seeing, we were being told we couldn't enforce local mask mandates because the company policy was to serve those customers anyway. And, when I brought to the attention of my manager that we were essentially being asked to break the law by the company, she said, well, that's our policy. I said, so it's more important to get that $5 caramel macchiato sale than it is to protect myself and my fellow coworkers from this, potential illness that's going around. And I actually came to the conclusion that I was going to leave the company. The pandemic had pushed me over the edge. Watching Kevin Johnson on these financial shows bragging about the record-breaking profits the company had been pulling in the midst of this global pandemic. And juxtaposed with my coworkers crying in the back room because working full-time for this billion-dollar corporation, they didn't know if they were going to be able to pay rent and put groceries in their fridge. Things were just not adding up. They weren't making sense. And so I decided I was leaving. I didn't know where I was going to go. I was hopeful that my industry was going to open up, soon. This is probably about June of 2021 now. So we've worked through a year of the pandemic.
And then just to be clear, that other, you were in like a film and commercial production, or was just live staging production?
Live theater. Okay. Live theater.
So that even came later. That came even much later.
It did.
Yep. Okay.
It did. Yeah. For obvious reasons. Right.
Right. I wasn't prepared to sit next to a room full of people
absolutely not
at that time. No.
Yeah. I mean, things are just kind of maybe getting back to some sort of normalcy now, and it's 2023.
Right.
So June of 2021, I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to leave. I'm going to do something somewhere where I'm feeling at least somewhat protected and valued. And August of 2021, my good friend Jazz Brzak, who you spoke to, and who was a coworker of mine at that Elmwood location in Buffalo, New York, sent me a text message and said, hey, do you want to get coffee after one of our shifts next week? Which was odd, because that's what we do all day, is serve coffee. But I thought, sure, let's go get a cup of coffee. I thought she was going to ask me about, there was a shift supervisor position becoming open at the store, and I thought she was going to submit for that, and she wanted my opinion. But that's not what she wanted. Instead, she asked me in that meeting what I thought about trying to unionize our store. And that was the beginning of this for me. I said I didn't have any thoughts on that. I didn't think of it as a possibility. I didn't know a lot about organized labor, but I was so fed up with where we were that I wanted to know anything she could tell me about it. And she did. And then at the end of that conversation, I said, okay, I'm in. And I think she was surprised. She had waited to talk to me until sort of very close to the end because of my long tenure with the company that, in most cases would bode for some kind of loyalty, maybe. And I think she was concerned that I would be like, what are you talking about? This company's perfect. We don't need to unionize. And the reality was that my time with the company is what pushed me to the realization that we had to unionize. And so that's where we started, August of 2021. And here we are, March of 2023, and it's spread across the country.
I mean, that's interesting. And I mean, this is sort of I want to ask as to why Jazz approached you. But first, that change that you noticed pre-pandemic. Yeah. Have you ever sort of figured out why that might be the case? Were they in a position where they had just expanded in such numbers, or was it they were was there a new administration that was coming in? Was there Wall Street pressure to sort of raise profits? I mean, this is it's largely irrelevant in terms of look, you're working at a place and all of a sudden it becomes miserable, or if it's miserable from the beginning, you want to protect yourself. But more broadly speaking, I'm just curious about if you had any. I mean,
I have some theories. It coincided pretty well with when Howard stepped down and Kevin Johnson stepped up. And I think in a lot of ways, Kevin was a numbers guy. He never pretended that he wasn't a numbers guy. And I give him some credit for that, to be honest with you. I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but he didn't pretend to care about the workers the way, in my opinion, Howard pretends to care about the workers. So I kind of, to a degree, respect that. But his concern was the shareholders. It was not, the workers in these stores. It was, how do we make these already incredibly profitable stores even more profitable? And what you have to do in most cases to accomplish that is cut things from the workers' lives. You have to cut down labor hours. You have to cut benefits packages. So it coincided very closely to Kevin coming into power.
And we should also say that I don't know specifically in this instance, but I would be very, very surprised if the people who hired Kevin, the board of directors, and Kevin himself were not also shareholders. I mean, a big part of the reason why, the big part of the reason why they do this is that they have a sort of almost a second business running concurrently with the one that involves the employees. And that is a side bet on the value of the stocks. And if they have the ability to raise the value of those stocks, even if in the long term it may not behoove the company because they're not investing in their workforce or their capital, they're gone, and their other business, the value of their stocks is doing great, and that's their lives. I mean, and so. Why do you think, and I think this would be interesting for people, because one of the things when we spoke to Chaz, which was Jazz back in, I think, June of last year, and we've spoken to a lot of people who have organized their workplaces, they're interested in those first moments as to when the organizing starts to happen. And did Jazz ask you for coffee because you were friends? Was she asking you because you were leaving? Have you guys ever talked about, like, you said she was surprised that because you've been there for a long time, you could have this sense of like, this is a perfect place. Why else would I have been here? Not necessarily aware of maybe the constraints that you were under or why you were there in the first place. But, and were you the first person she reached out to? Curious about this dynamic, so that, like, if there are people out there who want to organize their workplace, they get a sense of how this works.
So we were coworkers, and we got along very, very, very well. We often we were openers, so we were spending a lot of 5 a.m.s together. That is a bonding experience in and of itself. So there was that. She did not know at the time that I had been planning to leave, because nobody knew that I had been planning to leave. That was something that I was keeping to myself for the time being. She did not speak to me first. My understanding, and she'll be the first, we're incredibly close and very good friends now, but it was workers at multiple locations in Buffalo that had started talking about this. It wasn't just happening at a singular store. So I think that's very important, because that's part of the way we were able to survive what the company put us through in the very early stages, because it was coming from so many different places, and they didn't know how to, they kind of had to try to divide and conquer. So they couldn't centralize all of their sort of wrath in one store. I was one of the last people she spoke to, and it was because of my tenure with the company. And also, this is not to sound self-promoting or patting myself on the back, but I was a model employee, and in the 11 years at that point, that's how long I'd been with the company, I didn't have a single write-up or discipline. I did all of the things you were supposed to do. I wasn't a troublemaker. And so that seems like someone who is concerned about their job or their position within the company and willing to protect that. It's mostly just because I guess I'm just kind of a rule follower by nature. At least I was until recently. So it really didn't have anything to do with that, but she was just trying to get a read. At the very beginning stages of organizing is about figuring out how to read people. You have to be able to read your coworkers, because you have to know who you can start having these conversations with that aren't going to immediately run to a manager. And ultimately, the reason that our campaign went public when it did, she had this conversation with me on August 17th, and we went public on August 23rd. It was because inevitably someone did talk to a worker who did run to a manager. And so we went, all right, well, I guess we're going public. Now, we had been a few steps ahead and had a really large organizing committee by that point. So we were okay. But, imagine if that had been one of the first workers that they had spoken to. Did she,
and on one level, I can totally understand why someone like yourself, who has dedicated, a decade or more for a place and has been such a model employee, that the feeling of betrayal and sort of frustration and anger when, there's an awareness that you're being treated poorly and you have given, everything this company has asked for and more. I can definitely understand that dynamic, why that would create, in some ways, the most vehement union organizers. But I also imagine, from the perspective of Jazz's perspective, there are CoIncentric circles, and you have to approach first the people who are least likely that you think on paper to go to management. And by the time they get out to you, they have enough they sort of, forgive I'll use a different metaphor, but they are prepared within a couple of days' notice to be exposed and to go out. Like by the time they get to someone who they think she would be a great get, but she could also be a very high risk to tell people, we better be ready for her to go the next day to, manager Jim or Jen and, tell the whole thing so that the next day we're prepared. And that's sort of the way that you, I guess, just, and you're involved in production, you lay it out. That pre-production is very, very important in that instance. Okay. And so you guys go public in August of 23rd in 2021. Within 4 months, I guess my math is correct. By the beginning of January 2021, if I remember correctly, we're talking like 135 Starbucks, maybe, or I may be. It could have been more.
It did accelerate quickly. I don't think it was quite that quick. So we won on December 9th of 2021. And then a second location in Buffalo technically won the same day, but there were some, the company can file objections and all this other stuff that had to be followed through. So they weren't officially certified until January. So beginning of January, there's two. There are two stores who have managed to unionize in the U.S. After we won was when you started seeing dozens of petitions being filed at stores across the country. So it took a little bit longer for them to actually get to their election period and actually win them. But by summer, I think June of 2022, we're talking the number that you're talking about. Like stores just were filing left and right and then going to election and winning. I mean, we had something like 68 unanimous elections in favor of the union. I mean, that's
incredible.
Unbelievable. It's an unbelievable number given the war that the company has been waging on its workers who are trying to organize in the last 18 months.
Well, let's talk about that because, just yesterday, and we're recording this on Tuesday. We're going to be playing this on Wednesday, concurrent or just following Howard Schultz's appearance, or maybe just preceding Howard Schultz's appearance in front of the Help Committee in the Senate, where it seems Bernie Sanders has some questions for him. Those questions are going to be along the lines of a huge number of violations that the National Labor Relations Board has found or has identified, that Starbucks has engaged in that is illegal in terms of their attacks on the union. Give us a sense of what they are. And I imagine they run the gamut from like not quite illegal, but really sort of like, I mean, they could run the gamut from the CEO coming in and saying, in the Holocaust, you wouldn't have unionized, essentially. Mm-hmm. I remember that talk he gave that someone had recorded, but then ranging from like making things uncomfortable to crossing the line into legality. Give us a sense of those, both in terms of like their quality and quantity that you're aware of anyways.
So within a few days of this campaign going public back in August of 2021, starting here in Buffalo, Starbucks shipped in well over 100 out-of-town managers and upper-level corporate that essentially just invaded and took residence here in Buffalo. How
many Starbucks are in Buffalo? This is a city of what?
There's 20. There's 20 in our market. And part of the issue, and I alluded to this earlier in the interview, is that our organizing committee consisted of workers from, I believe, almost every single store in our market. So, and we sent that as a public letter to Kevin Johnson with our names signed publicly, those of us who were okay with putting our names public. So they didn't know where to focus their attentions when they came in here. It wasn't like it was a single store where they could say, okay, this is Elmwood and we're going to smash this out right now and it's not going to move any further. So they didn't know what to do. So all of a sudden, all of these upper level corporate members and high performing store managers from other stores across the country are being sent into Buffalo, and they're stationed here. It's essentially an invasion. At one point, there's an out of town manager sitting in one of the cafes, doing work on his computer, and he has pulled up on his screen some sort of graphic, and it says Starbucks Buffalo SWAT team. Like that's what they're referring to themselves as. And it started with what the company called listening sessions, which are captive audience meetings, basically workers being forced to attend a meeting on work hours. They're saying they love to say these were optional meetings, but they weren't, because workers were essentially being told, hey, you can come to this meeting for an hour and we'll pay you for 3 hours. So if you're an hourly worker living paycheck to paycheck and you're being told you can sit in this hotel conference room for an hour and you're going to get paid for 3 hours, you need that money. Or if you're an hourly worker who's being told your store's closing at 3 p.m. today, and you're normally a closer that works until 10 o'clock, and you can get paid for your whole shift, but in order to get paid for your whole shift, you have to come and attend this meeting. If not, then you're going to lose out on those hours. Those are no longer optional meetings. Those are mandatory meetings. They also stationed managers, they called them support managers, in all of our stores under the guise of supporting our store manager. They said the reason we were unionizing was that our management was so poor here that it had forced us to unionize. The reality was it was because they wanted to have managerial presence every single day or every single hour the store was open. A normal store manager is 40 hours a week, pretty typical. There's lots of hours in the week that there is no store manager at the store. But now there's a store manager every single second the store is open. They are right behind you when you're going into the back to get a sleeve of cups. They are interrupting conversations, whether you're, God forbid you say the word union on the floor, and that they're there to do that. So it was constant surveillance, constant intimidation. For me, I was actually at the beginning of this, I was prepared to be passive. I was going to be supportive, but I wasn't going to be the one to stand up and, make the noise, because I didn't think I had that in me, and I didn't think I had the time to do it. It was the first captive audience meeting where I was sitting across the circle from Ross Ann Williams, the president of Starbucks North America at the time, as she cried crocodile tears and told us, that we were all partners. That's what Starbucks calls its workers, partners. And she just didn't understand, why we were doing this. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, is this woman for real? She makes $4 million a year. There's no way any of us sitting around this circle are in any way the same as her. And I'm looking at the faces of my coworkers who are scared, like they're being bullied into voting against their best interest. And they ended this meeting by saying, we're just giving you the facts. So if you want facts about the union, you need to go find a union organizer and ask them. And so I was like, that's it. And I raised my hand and I said, hey, I'm one of the organizers and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. And they ended that meeting very quickly. But it was that moment where I was like, there's no way to be passive in this fight. You're either standing up and screaming that these are your rights and you want them respected, or, you're going to get rolled over by the company.
Do you think that when she cried, do you think that she really thought that, it's one thing to sort of do that so that we can show that, we can say that we're upset and that we have such a family, that we're a family here and we share our blankets and that type of thing, the metaphors. But do you think that they actually also are just so out of touch that they don't even realize how condescending their perspective on their own workers is?
Unfortunately, I think there's a significant chance that that's true. They drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, a long time ago. And if you're in those upper levels of this
$4 million a year buys a lot of Kool-Aid. And
I'm
that's
sure,
sort of hard to sort of, digest. But
I'm sure she felt very taken care of. She never had to worry about paying rent and putting groceries in her fridge, at least not for a very long time. I'm not going to say she's never in her life had to, but she had been living the way she'd been living long enough to not really remember what that was like. And it was insulting. It was incredibly insulting. Them coming into our stores in their $500 suits behind our counters in the middle of a peak, when we're crazy busy, and saying, oh, do you want me to take the garbage out for you? Do you want me to clean the No, I don't want you to come in here and do my job for me. I just want you to compensate me better for doing my job.
Right.
It was condescending and it was insulting. And it was very, very uncomfortable to experience that for such a long duration, which was months.
All right, so let's talk about these various violations, like these captured audience, I guess, meetings that they hold. And they fired people, right? And they threatened people, and they shut down stores where they anticipated unionizing. All of these things are illegal. And I was about to say the National Labor Relations Board just basically punished or came to an agreement, I guess, like a plea deal, if you will, with Chipotle. For almost $300,000 for a restaurant they had up in Augusta, Maine, where they have to compensate these employees and they have to put them on a "we'll hire you back" list. And they basically had to, it's almost like a consent decree to not pull this kind of thing in their other New England stores and whatnot. Where are we with that in terms of Starbucks?
So a lot of decisions have been coming down from these hearings that basically what ends up happening is the NLRB takes over when a unfair labor practices chart is filed on behalf of, the union because of egregious behavior by the company. It's then investigated by the National Labor Relations Board. And if they find merit to that, then they actually bring the company into a hearing, into trial. It's the National Labor Relations Board prosecuting the company for their behavior. And so I think that's very, very interesting because it's a whole process. It's not like, he said, she said, I said they did this, and then all of a sudden they're going to a hearing. It's an incredible amount of time and affidavits and gathering evidence to do that. Now we've gone to a hearing in a lot of these things. There was one in Buffalo that was 2 months long. That's huge. And the decision that the ALJ came down with a few weeks ago, beginning of the month, I think, the decision was over 200 pages long. That's how many violations they found that the company had committed against its workers. It may be the biggest in modern history. And that's just one. That's just one case here in Buffalo. And it was about illegal firings, firing people for being a minute late who had never been late with the company.
So that's just one store
that's one market. It probably
one market. Okay, it's by market. Okay, I see.
Yeah, I mean, it probably encompassed
because they're regional stores. The hearings are held on a regional basis. I see. And I would also imagine that the reason why there are so many affidavits taken, why there is so many that everything has to be buttoned up, because these corporations have lawyers who are on retainer, maybe they're in-house counsel. This is it. They've been paid for a long time, and it is literally almost like the fire department. You're here. We've been paying you. We haven't had these fires. You've been just dealing with some small. This is where you get paid for, and they got to go out and make their money by trying to put holes in these cases, and that's why they're so buttoned up, as it were.
Absolutely. And Littler Mendelsohn is the firm that Starbucks has been employing throughout this campaign. And this, that's what they do. They're a management law firm, and that is what they do. They come in and try to stop places from unionizing. And they've been aggressive. But the company has spent millions upon millions of dollars at this point to try to stop something that is not stoppable. They haven't managed to contain this in any way. And I think that's what I'd like people to realize is that the company's game plan has always been based on our successes. At first they came in and the idea was to stop it all together, and they failed. And then it was, okay, well, we're going to contain it to Buffalo. You've got Kevin Johnson going, well, this is going to be contained to a handful of stores in a couple of markets. He made that statement sometime in January of 2022. Then they were like, you know what, we're going to contain it to 100 stores after it moved out of the Buffalo area. We exceeded 100 stores. And all of a sudden they're going, well, we'll contain it at 200 stores. And we exceeded 200 stores. Now they're been going around telling people it's containable at 300. They just adjust their numbers and their plan based on how successful we've been, which is incredibly successful in a very short period of time. So to me, that's good news. That is not putting a whole lot of faith in their union busting playbook.
Where are we at in terms of actually getting contracts? So people have to understand once the union is there, then they negotiate a contract, and the companies can drag their feet quite a while for that.
And they have been.
And the idea is to get people disillusioned with the union because And so, like we haven't had a contract. It's been a year and a half. What's going on? What goes on during that time? So
it's funny that you brought this up because I'm not even sure that you know this yet. And if you do, I apologize. But a decision or a complaint is about to drop in the Chicago region, which is alleging that the company is failing to bargain in good faith with the union. And that's a very, very, very big deal. What's been happening is the company has been coming into these bargaining sessions with stores across the country. I think, we've had somewhere just under 100 bargaining sessions since last October. And they're doing this by individual store basis. The company has only agreed to bargain individual store contracts. We can talk about that at a different time because that's just unbelievably crazy. But anyway, what they're doing is we are in a bargaining session and we have some members of our bargaining committee who can't participate in person for accessibility issues or geographical issues, something along those lines. And so we'd have a committee in person sitting at these tables, and then we'd have the rest of our committee members on a Zoom screen so that they could participate virtually. Well, the company would come in, look at the Zoom screen, and walk out of the room immediately and say, we are not bargaining with you if you have any participants in a virtual format, which is just insane. It's 2023. And we've been, unions have been negotiating contracts via Zoom since the pandemic hit. Well, that's, the NLRB is now coming down and saying that was unlawful. You cannot do that. You can't use that as an excuse not to negotiate a contract with these workers. And so that just sort of came down yesterday. It hasn't officially dropped, but it's a big deal.
Wow, I did not know about that. And when they make a ruling like that, will they say you've got 3 months or you've got, we need a deal within 3 months here?
I think what can happen is they recommend a remedy, what they would call for it. And then like anything, it still has to go to a hearing. It still has to actually go to a hearing where a judge hands down, an official ruling on it. But the fact that they were willing to say this as clearly as it was said is a huge deal, not just for Starbucks workers, but for anybody in any kind of labor organizing in 2023, where we shouldn't have to worry about. The company has done a lot of really egregious things when it comes to bargaining. Slow walking is a big part of it, but also failing to schedule sessions that allows our workers to get off of their shifts in order to be at these sessions, or canceling sessions at the last minute, or changing the location of these sessions at the very last minute. I mean, basically anything you can think of to delay the process we've been put through in the last 18 months.
And I imagine, Schultz is going to have to answer questions about this, on this day that it airs at some point in the Help Committee. The answer to this, I mean, a lot of this stuff is so cumbersome, and part of it is set up that way, like statutorily, because it disempowers the workers, and so I mean, from your perspective. And I don't think we're going to see any, pro-labor legislation out of, well, we're certainly not going to see it out of a Republican-controlled House. But I think we're a couple of senators away, even in a Democratic-controlled Senate, at the very least. But if you had to choose one sort of like statutory fix that would be your ask, what would it be?
I mean, the PROAct had a lot of really, really great stuff in it. One of them was the limit put on, I guess it would be put on both sides, but it was definitely directed more to the company side, of a time limit based on when an agreement needs to be reached.
Once a union has been certified, you've got the clock starts ticking.
Correct.
And then there's all sorts of other powers that accrue to the union in that instance that would up their negotiation, their leverage really at that point.
If the company doesn't come to the table in a meaningful way. And then that's major. I mean, like you said, we won in December of 2021. It is end of March of 2023. And my store, the first one, we're still fighting for, I'd like to say we're fighting for this contract because the company has come to the table in a meaningful way, and we're just going through the real process of bargaining and negotiating, and that's what's taken this much time. But the reality is they've never come to the table in any meaningful way. We've come with very well thought out proposals. We've presented them thoughtfully. We've had workers there sharing their stories as to why, a health and safety proposal is incredibly important to us and our jobs. And we've been met with, stone-faced members of corporate and Littler Mendelsohn attorneys who just look angry that they even have to be sitting at a table in any form talking to an hourly worker. Right. And so that's what we need. We need some sort of regulations put on time because, like you said, they'll drag it out.
Michelle, just one last, when you go to that table, you guys aren't just looking we want, $50 an hour, $100 an hour. You're looking to both increase things like health and safety, but also scheduling things that take into mind that you're human beings and not, machines essentially. And what are the other big asks? And is it really that at the end of the day, are they worried about how much it's going to cost in terms of dollars? Or is there some other sort of intangible that they just are afraid of empowering workers and they think that leads to something scary?
I have a very hard time thinking and believing that it's financially, an issue because of what they've spent, what they've paid these attorneys to try to stop this. It would have probably been more cost effective to just come and negotiate this contract. The company makes something like over $1 million an hour. It's an absurd number when you calculate what the company brings in. So I can't believe that it's financial. To me, it's a power thing. We're fighting Howard Schultz's ego. That's the reality of the situation. Nobody likes being told that your life's work is not as good as you think it is. And that's where we are. We're fighting him and what, his very idealistic view of what this company is. And so, yeah, I think that's the main issue. As far as what we're asking for, we've got some core non-economic proposals, which include health and safety, which include organizing rights, the company recognizing its workers' rights to organize and essentially standing down so that we can do this without fear of retribution and retaliation and being fired. And as far as economics, we're asking for a livable wage. We're asking for guaranteed hours and scheduling. Right now, if profits are down, one of their main tactics is to come in and slash workers' hours. So you could be working 30 hours a week, and then next week the schedule comes out and you're down to 15. So you've just cut my annual income by 50% because profits are down, and that's how you're going to try to balance that out. Unless you're telling me that, Howard's salary gets cut down by 50% when profits are down, you're going to the very bottom, to the people who are running these stores on a daily basis. They are the ones solely responsible for getting those drinks out, for keeping those customers, for nurturing those relationships. And you're saying, hey, profits are down. So you know what? We're going to have to cut your hours. And they're very careful. They don't say we're cutting your salary by 50%. They say we've got to cut hours until sales go back up. So that's a huge proposal, making sure that we're protected in that way.
Right. I mean, the bottom line is, folks are working there because they need to pay for their lives, and their lives don't get any more cheaper in those moments. And again, we should also say, that's not a situation where the company's not profitable anymore. It's just that it's not as profitable. And their shares are just not as valuable as they were before. And we're talking millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to some of these people. I have to ask you this. Have you ever sat across the table from them and said, you need to be willing to find a solution that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility? That's that was Bill Burton's.
Definitely not in those words. I think what we have said is, we've sat across the table, and in these instances, I should note that it's not the company that does most of the talking. It's usually a Littler attorney that is the voice. Right. Someone who has no idea how this company actually works and definitely doesn't know what our jobs actually, entail. And we've said, hey, listen, here's the mission and values of this company. Can you look at us and tell us that these mission and values in this moment, in this recent history, are being upheld? And, I don't believe that you can. So let us help you. Let us help you do that. Let us help you make it so that the company, is actually what it professes to be.
The lawyers don't.
They definitely don't like that. No, they don't like that one little bit. Well, I think the word propaganda was thrown around a couple of times.
My quote was, to be fair, was one that I've never forgotten, that Howard Schultz, one of his campaign managers, said on a TV program about Howard, and I just found it so ridiculous that I had to ask. If you've ever deployed that, I apologize for that. But thank you so much.
I think it's great.
Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and hope to check in with you guys in several months to see if things are if Starbucks at one point just makes the decision that we need to deal with our workers as human beings instead of just sort of some type of cogs that increase the value of our stocks. Really appreciate your time, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Sam.
We're back, ladies and gentlemen. Not everyone is aware that we need a solution that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility. I went out on a limb. Sometimes the jokes just get they're a little bit too narrow of a reference.
And maybe we need a solution to it that risks the imagination of a new kind of possibility.
We will play more clips of the hearing, and as we speak, there are other Starbucks workers who are in these hearings right now. We'll play some clips of Howard Schultz. Just got an IM, Build Back Bitter. I found that interview with Michelle Eisen from Starbucks Union to be a beautiful mixture of inspiring and down to earth. What an impressive group of people, and great interview. Yeah, thank you. I felt the same way. And that's why, I thought the interview was going to go 20 minutes long, and I just thought it was really instructive as to how you folks can organize your own workplace, both from a tactical standpoint and also sort of the context in which that happens. And Iowa Ryan writes, I work at a cannabis grow and I'm taking notes on all these union shows. Thank you. I'm definitely building relationships at work and eventually might try to get something going. That what I took away from that interview, there was a lot of things I took away from it, but it had never occurred to me the way that you as an organizer will approach, you're developing relationships, some of which pre-exist this, but the way that you will sort of map out who you approach, in what order, and what you need to have sort of locked and loaded, as it were, the further out you get from someone you think who's going to have a positive response. Because there's always this danger that at any moment, the boss is going to find out about it.